Of the CIS and Senteon webinar series, a deep dive into the CIS benchmarks. I'm your host, Zach Kromkowski from Senteon OS Hardening, and I am almost going to be joined by my co-host, Rich McGraw from CIS. A little bit of technology difficulties, as Raffi says, Murphy's Law. But I am here with special guest, Raffi from Triada Networks. Raffi has been a longtime friend of Senteon and entrepreneurs I've heard across the board. So we've done a lot of market research together, gotten to know him pretty well over the years. But he founded Triada Networks with his wife in 2008 after spending 12 years in corporate IT leadership for one of the larger independent asset management firms in the US. Welcome, Raffi. Do you mind kicking us off with a little bit of a deeper dive into you and your security background?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I started out in IT. I studied computer engineering in college and then started out in IT in the mid-90s. This is pre-internet. And, built the first firewalls at the firm, big Solaris machines that cost a lot of money and didn't do a lot of work.
And built the first firewalls at the office.
Firewalls, yeah. we were the ones that were plugging into the internet. Our first emails were all like, we had them air gapped with serial cables, like to run the emails into the office. It was an interesting time. So what we clearly working for a financial firm, we need to understand what all the risks were and create. And we didn't have necessarily a cybersecurity program or InfoSec program at the time. So we
as the MSP, you've transitioned from a traditional MSP into offering security services. Is that correct?
No, this is in corporate. This is before that. This is actually before that. So we were just transitioning the company in the late 90s at this point to actually have an InfoSec program, and that was kind of the time in the financial services. So fast forward 2006, 2008, I left that firm and started the MSP as a kind of a focused on financial services. And because we were so steeped in investments and compliance and security, it was natural for us to continue that trend, even as we were starting out in 2008. So we've kind of always been there. Now the language is caught up, I guess, in some ways. And so that's been our story so far.
That's awesome. So I guess I was jumping a little bit ahead, but when you did branch off, were you always focused on security, or is this an initiative that was kind of pushed upon you from trends and whatnot?
No, we kind of always were. And it was partly it was my own interest, because I had a heavy interest in security. I also had a heavy interest in emerging technology. So one of the cool things about working with private equity firms is that they usually are investing in neat new products. And so it allowed us to kind of get our hands on like the early FireEye appliances for like super cheap, because we knew all the people that were the heads of sales for all these companies. We were able to get this gear for this tiny little investment firm. We were able to get this gear in order to actually test it out. So the good part of it is that I got to play around with a lot of toys. The bad part of it is mentally it became more of a tool-centric approach rather than a process and procedure-centric approach. And so we had to make that mental shift over the years for that. But that was a lot easier for us to do than, say, an MSP, I think, that had no clue when it came to security to now adopt this new, concept.
That is extremely interesting because, being a vendor in the MSP space, I'm bringing a new solution to the market, this OS hardening concept that hasn't necessarily been done with a software before, right? So when you talk about when you started out very tool-centric, you got to see the early stage companies get in on those deals, which every MSP, man, support your early stage vendors, you get discounts. Yeah. Raffi's a huge champion. So I guess, can you go a little bit more into detail how you moved from tool-centric to process-centric? Like, you obviously reduced your vendors. I mean, can you elaborate more on that?
Yeah, when it was just one or two companies that we were managing, it was easy to have a complex technology stack to kind of, and all these kind of parts that we had to keep running and plates spinning. And as we started to expand and scale, it became a lot harder to maintain that complexity. And so this is now probably about 4 or 5 years in. We realize that we need to start simplifying our process, because if we don't do that, this is going to outrun us, and we're not going to be able to keep up with the labor that is needed to keep all these plates spinning in the air. So that's that. It was that realization, and it became all right, how do we simplify? How does Raffi stop pulling his hair out and turning white, and actually work with the companies going forward that way? And so that was really kind of the epiphany or aha moment at the time. It's like, all right, let's start simplifying our stack, not necessarily removing our capability, losing our capability, but let's work towards something that was, and this is pre-frameworks, right? This is not, there was no NIST cybersecurity framework. You had ISO, and that was kind of, and you had older frameworks like COVID and things like that. But there were, and so then I got introduced to SANS and the SANS Top 20, and that's kind of how we early on were learning about what eventually became the CIS controls, and that's kind of, that became more of our governing body towards, okay, where does this fit? Does it fit? And if it doesn't, do we really need to do something there?
That's awesome to hear how you grew and really focused on using a framework, because I think there are a lot of earlier stage MSPs that still think they're able to make the best security decisions on their own without leveraging a framework. And I'm going to pass this one to Rich now that Rich has joined us. But what have you kind of seen? Your focus is MSPs at CIS, Rich. What have you kind of seen with your newer relationships? Are all MSPs really adopting CIS? Is there pushback? I mean, what are you seeing in the market? Oh, no audio on you, Rich. We almost got it. We almost got you working. We'll come back to you on that.
Live TV. This is exciting. See, this is what happens.
Hey man, we were 2 for 2 on the first 2 weeks. It was bound to happen at one of these points. But Raffi, I'll toss the question to you.
Sure.
Do you see CIS becoming an accepted standard in our space, or is it still kind of a little bit of NIST, a little bit of SANS? Like, what are you seeing standard wise?
Well, I think what NIST brought to the table was a simplified framework that that companies or small businesses and mid-tier businesses can actually adopt and look at, which is really neat. But it wasn't. I think most MSPs don't think the way that the NIST framework thinks, and so I think they think more prescriptively, which is why CIS has been something that more MSPs are prone to adopt. And if an MSP doesn't have a specific need to adopt any other framework, for example, let's say they're working with primarily construction companies and CMMC is kind of the way to go, or if they're primarily working with healthcare and HIPAA is the way to go, start with those frameworks first. But if you don't, CIS is a great baseline to then you can do into anything. And now that the most of the frameworks can really map well to each other. Yeah. I've been involved with CompTIA over the years, and tangentially involved with the Security Plus Trustmark. That is clear, especially the current one is completely mapped to the CIS on top of some additional privacy stuff that we pulled in from the NIST standard. So these frameworks are really a great I call it the constitution of your business, right? This is really where it starts from.
No luck on you, Rich. Not yet. But I'm going to give another shout out. Last week, Roddy had talked about PAX 8, how they are actually helping out with vendors aligning their solution value props to the CIS controls. What's your take on that? How valuable is that?
When I heard that was really, so unfortunately I wasn't able to make PAX 8's conference. That was really exciting. I think one of the things that if you had gone to some of the, if you've gone to Right of Boom this past year and the year before, for example, there's big talk about using the cyber defense framework as a methodology, which is based on primarily from the NIST, at least the domains. But because of the way that it gave a kind of, no, I wouldn't say formulaic, but a way to organize your thinking around InfoSec, it was a great way to say, okay, these are the vendors that fit into this box. These are the processes I do that fit into this box. And by Pax8 doing that with CIS, I think that's massively successful. The problem, the number one thing I hear other MSPs complain about is, what should I have? What should I be buying? First of all, you should probably take a step back from that. But this is the answer right there, is right. All right, start with the framework, and then here's a good roadmap of where you should go next. And I think that's very exciting that not only are they doing it with their own products, but doing it with products that's not in their solution set yet. You know,
that is awesome.
Yeah.
I will speak as a vendor who looking to get into that marketplace eventually. It's a long process. So the fact that they are encouraging vendors who aren't currently part of it to still get in, I mean, kudos to Pax8 joining the community together.
Yeah, and they have a very strong vetting process for their vendor community. And one of the things that, I don't know if we'll talk about this at all, one of my biggest bailiwicks now is around third-party risk. In fact, kind of by throwing out a shout out, if you're going to ChannelCon, we're going to be doing a panel on third-party and supply chain risk there. So and Matt Lee's involved in that panel. So it's a nice, strong connection between the third-party risk issue as well as what Pax8's doing to vet vendors as well into the ecosystem. So very exciting.
That'll be an awesome panel. And, obviously we're here to talk about benchmark section 1.2 with account lockout policy. But to wrap up that previous topic on supply chain, something that you even did working with us over at Senteon, you had your vendor fill out a security questionnaire. Is this something that you're proposing to every single vendor? Is this becoming a standard in the space, or are you ahead of the curve? What are you seeing? And shout out to Stev representing Pax8.
Yeah, I can't wear any of those vendor socks. My ankles, I have ankles, I guess, and they're too constricted.
I have to wash them like 3 times to get all the fuzzies off. They're a little messier than normal socks I get from the store.
So I think one of the things that I kept hearing from I would say the people who have come into the industry from the outside, right? So I left corporate in the mid 2000s to then start my MSP, and hearing the people that have come more recently. So as the enterprise InfoSec has matured at a different pace, obviously, than the small and medium business, those people were talking about, they continuously asking questions about why aren't MSPs asking these questions about their vendors? They're talking about themselves, like as a vendor, like why aren't they asking us about these things? And so that was one of those things, like, yeah, we're not asking that question. We're taking it on face value that people are doing what they're saying they're doing, and not to throw anyone under the bus. But if you look at the most recent, I don't know, 4 LastPass breaches that have occurred, there were revelations in those breaches that they weren't necessarily doing the things that they set out they do, or they were doing it in an outside way. It's almost like doing a SOC 2 audit where you really scoped out, like, if I'm going to do a SOC 2 audit, but only this mouse is in scope. So yeah, I've SOC 2 audited and I passed my audit, but it's so narrowly scoped that it doesn't make sense, which is why I think these questions are important for MSPs to ask. Now, at some point, it's going to become too onerous for MSPs to ask every vendor and every vendor to answer every MSP. There's going to have to be some middle ground where, and there's probably an opportunity there for like a company similar to a CyberGRX. And I think there's some other people that do things in the MSP space that will do this on behalf of the industry. And it might be that Pax8 or those kind of middle ground distributors is that company to do something like that.
Another feature request to that Pax8.
I may or may not have asked them about that.
How powerful would it be? There is no one standard questionnaire, but what can cybersecurity vendors in our space do? Like, what if they had a section on their website or put it in their documentation. Like
Yeah.
describe a perfect world to me. What would prove to you that you can trust your vendor?
Yeah, I mean, I think the more transparent you are, and that was kudos to Senteon for being very transparent with where they are, both in terms of their maturity and where they are. Look, we're dealing with emerging vendors here, so you know that where you are in your life cycle is different than a CrowdStrike is, right? So you're going to be looking at those two vendors a little bit differently, but the risk profile is different too. So you need to understand all that stuff. So that in an ideal world, we would have some place that we can grab this information, almost like I want like an API for security risk controls, where you can say, all right, this based on this is what this company is for us, and this is the risk profile it is, and then based on that, you can make decisions for your company. That's kind of pie in the sky. So short of that, at least be outside and said, these are the things that we've done. Here's our process. You don't have to be super detailed. If you want to have more detailed information, fill out this form and sign our NDA, and we'll have a discussion. And I think if you start there, that's probably going to deal with 80% of the questions. The fact that you're even doing that is something. You know, it's like having a bug bounty program. The fact that you even have a bug bounty program means that you're taking this process seriously. So.
Now, I am loving where this conversation is going. And to give a scope of how the rest of the webinar is going to go, we do only have 4 CIS benchmarks to discuss today. So account lockout policy is a short topic. So I want to ask one more question going into how you work with your clients on this, Raffi. How important is documentation that you show your clients? I mean, do they ask about your vendor stack? I mean, could you kind of talk about what your onboarding process is almost like? What does the client know? What do they see?
So prior to 2020, it was different. And prior to 2020, it was, this is the stuff we did for you. And don't worry about what goes on inside the black box. Nothing to see here, kind of thing. And
that's changing.
Yeah. And so, that's changed. Partly that's changed because we started getting, one of the things that we do for our clients, because they're in the investment, they're typically they're asset managers are typically doing either fund of funds, or they're part of some other investment process. So when an investor comes in to do diligence on them, we're sitting at the table and answering questions on their behalf. They're asking these explicit questions. The client's not. The client can care less if we're using brand Y of EDR versus brand X. But the other guy does. And so when we answer those questions and we tell them, okay, yeah, we're using these are the products that we're using. This is the purpose of this. They ask for a product name, we provide the product name. Most of the time we actually build a slide or two for each client that they can add to their deck. So when they have a due diligence discussion with an investor or a pension program or whatever, they just include that. And then we include, it's a slide on security stack and a slide on business resilience. And these are the things that we're doing in that place. And then they're basically like, oh, that's great. And then they just move on. So now there's no question anymore. When you force the hand for somebody to ask the question, or you don't say something and they have to ask the question, they're already coming at across as almost adversarial. This way, it's a way for them to get a better sales process. So, they're selling essentially, right? That's what the investment process is. Yep. So they're selling to their investor, and we make that easier for them to sell. That's the key. And then when it comes to audits, we're going through an SEC audit with our oldest client right now. It makes those audits go quicker too, because it's like, yeah, we laid everything out. This is our stack. This is what we do. This is how these are the processes we follow. We follow, do you do it? And they'll ask questions. Do you follow benchmark? Yes, we follow CIS, and we do all these additional things that are FINRA related. Like, fantastic. Show us your documentation for that. Here's the point on documentation. Now they want us to not only just attest to it, they actually want to show the evidence that we're evidence of control. So the evidence of control is needed now going forward for that. And this is why it's becoming more and more important that our GRC processes include that evidence of control, which it hadn't in the past. In the past, it was like, are we doing these things? Yes, we know we are. We point to what it is, but now we're actually collecting evidence of control, and that's kind of a newer evolution of how we're dealing with it.
Absolutely. And I think this is a trend that we're seeing across the board, right? Something I've seen with the MSPs I work with, they may have clients of their own, end clients that are venture backed. And the MSP comes to me, hey, my client is now asking for me to prove that I have a baseline. I've been doing this ad hoc with PowerShell scripts, a little bit with Intune group policy, but I don't have a way to show them that I'm doing all 400 plus of the CIS benchmarks.
Exactly.
That's overkill for some businesses, but at the same time, it is that prescriptive one-to-one mappings. And so it's incredible to hear your point of view working in this investment space, because investors and buyers from these end clients are asking to see the security proof.
Yeah.
Why should I trust you? It's not just an assumption anymore. And if they do go to cyber insurance claims, go to the court, attesting to it's great, proving it is that next level.
Yeah, and it's similar to the idea of vulnerability, the difference between patch management and a vulnerability management program, right? So you can do patching, you can have all the patch policies in place, but are you also checking to make sure that that's all working? I know we're getting off topic here, but this is kind of
it's all in the same vein.
It's all in the same vein. So you're now looking at, all right, yes, I'm doing it, and here's also a secondary proof that we are doing it.
No, absolutely. And speaking of that, let's get back to the main vein. Speaking of section 1.2 for workstations and servers, Windows of the CIS benchmarks, account lockout policy. So kicking off with the conversation on that head over, you don't have to share the slide yet. But could you just kind of define what an account lockout policy is, why it's important?
Yeah, so we have three hills that we die on when it comes to security and technologies: data resilience, systems resilience, and identity resilience. And the account lockout policies are part of that identity resilience. If you're identifying who the person is, how they're authenticate themselves, and then and that was kind of their first control that you guys talked about. But now you're talking about how do you prevent somebody else from hijacking that identity, right? So that's the idea of why account lockup policies are important. These are the gates to make sure that people are doing things in the right way.
So much more of a preventative measure versus like a reactive EDR. Setting these reactively is valuable, right?
Yes and no. I think it's partly reactive, but I think it's proactive. But I think it's partly also it's a little bit right of boom as well. And we can talk about that too. But we primarily you're doing it for that preventative and prevent that account from being compromised to begin with. But it also can be an indication of that an account is being actively targeted as well. And so that's also an interesting aspect of it.
And we'll get into some of the MITRE attack techniques, but and the CIS benchmarks, I know some of these is if you have so many invalid attempts or incorrect attempts, it's going to lock you out. I mean, what does that mean from your point of view when you see that alert come up? Hey, someone input their password wrong 5 times in a row. Is that valuable information to you? Are you aware? What does that mean?
It is. We see it especially as we've cloudified companies, to lack of I don't know if that's a real word, but whatever.
I love the word.
Go for it. So as our identities have been morphed to also include services in the cloud, especially things around Office 365, and primarily focusing on that, for example, it's become more important because now our attack surface is completely different. Inside a firewall, the attack surface was you had to be inside in order to then now attack the identity. Or if you had a hosted exchange, you were attacking the identity. So understanding where, if somebody is under a target attack, there's possibly something else going on. Either that account's been compromised elsewhere and they're doing password spraying now, or there's some other activity that's drawing specific, because we see it around specific users. We don't see it around like the
Interesting.
entire account base. If you have 100 employees in the company, they're not password spraying 100 people. They're doing it against specific people. And so by identifying who the person that's being targeted, there's a good chance that something else has occurred along the way, and that's a good indication of that.
I love that. It looks like we have Rich back. How's your audio? No audio yet. So tough, but that is okay. We will keep on working on that in the background. So that's the perfect explanation of account lockout policies. As we're going to get into the benchmarks, there are 4 recommendations that they provide. But before we go too deep into that, I want to talk about the MITRE attack techniques, and you can pull up that slide now. First of all, are you familiar with MITRE? Is this something that you talk about with your peers? Is this something you bring up even with customers? I mean, what does MITRE have a place in your sales cycle?
MITRE doesn't have where we discuss MITRE is not specifically MITRE. It's 2 areas that we talk about MITRE. When we talk about more along the lines of the cyber kill chain, which was something that was coined by Lockheed Martin. And that was MITRE is kind of also in that same vein, where you're looking at, people say, oh, they have to be only right once. We have to be right 100% of the time. That's not true. We actually have to be right one place along that chain before they can get access to whatever. So maybe they don't get they get initial access, but we're able to catch them during some other part of that change. So every gate along the way is important to have something in place in order to catch that particular actor from doing it. So we don't talk to our clients specifically about what MITRE is in general, but we talk about, we have these things in place because this is what can happen. This is the anatomy of a breach. We had a blog post and a webinar about this years ago. What is in the anatomy of a breach? And so are we able to then identify something along the way that's going to lead to that breach? And the MITRE attack framework is a great way to understand and talk about that. What we use MITRE is more when we're doing assessment engagements. And so when we send when we sick one of our hounds on a prospect or a client that's doing an assessment, they're using the same techniques that our adversaries are using, so that we can see not only are there any chinks in the armor, but is there a weakness somewhere that we can that we need to shore up.
That's awesome. That's exactly right. And I guess one other thing that I'm curious about, in the handout, I think we have a case study example of a brute force attack. I think it was Dunkin' Donuts that we listed in the deep dive today, if you can see that in the comments. But do you talk about statistics? I mean, I hear all the time vendors pile statistics on statistic and they've lost their juice, right? Yeah. What about your point of view? Do you talk about?
No, we don't. Statistics. Some statistics can help to emphasize something, but for the most part, we deal in stories. When we tell a story about something that's happened either to one of their peers or something that we're involved with directly, those are the things that that resonate, because they can put themselves into that story and get the emotional feeling out of it. And that's really what helps in terms of the sales process.
Very interesting. So going back to account lockout policies and what the MITRE attack techniques really, how this mitigates, right? So we have a few listed on here: persistence, privilege escalation, credential access. I feel like those 3 in particular have a very strong correlation with mitigating the risk of brute force attacks. Right. Could you kind of just key in on one or two of these and just talk towards how account lockout policy helps mitigate this threat and what it is?
So if you're looking at, so 100% right, we're really looking at what can you do for a brute force attempt. If somebody's doing a brute force attempt, they either have a password or they think that they're going to iterate on an existing password. Maybe they understand, maybe they, maybe Zach logged into Amazon with a password that's something cryptic with the word Amazon at the end of it, and then now they're trying to log into your Office account, and so they're trying some variation of that. So that may be where you're doing that. So when you have it properly configured, when you have AOP properly configured, you're really looking at, can we stop that, slow it down? So you're looking at and I think mobile devices do a really good job with this one with pins, for example, making it progressively harder as you're getting more and more attempts. Whereas in desktops, it's a little bit more fixed. But now you're making it harder to automate that brute force login. And because they have so many accounts that they can potentially try, making it harder in any one place is you're adding cost to their process. And so they're going to try to make a cheaper way of doing it. They're going to find a cheaper, water finds the easiest vein, right, to get through to something, and that's what the attacker is going to do. So ultimately, that's going to be, and all those different pieces of AOP are different levers in that game that you're playing, and which is why we have so many of them that are very flexible in terms of what they do, and depending on what your risk profile is and what your tolerance is to noise is going to be able to dictate what level you're going to set those numbers to.
Yeah, and we'll get into that more in depth here in the next few slides. One MITRE attack technique I want to call out is privilege escalation. When a bad actor, maybe they do get access to a user account, that could be getting in through a phish or various other means. Could you explain this concept of privilege escalation and how a bad actor and why a bad actor might want to change from a user to an admin? I mean, what's the reason behind it from the attacker perspective?
I mean, it depends on what the attacker's goal is, right? So if an attacker is just looking to get access to what that employee has access to, then privilege escalation becomes less relevant, which is what has happened in kind of the blow up of ransomware, right? So privilege escalation is really not necessary unless you're doing some sort of lateral movement, what have you. That's another place where you would need privilege escalation. But all you need to do, if you're just looking to encrypt documents on the machine that you're on, or the file shares that person has access to, you don't need to have additional privileges for that. But it is an indication of what ransomware actors want to do is be able to distribute their product as fast as possible with the least amount of effort. And the easiest way to do that in an Active Directory environment is to get AD credentials and stick it in a GPO and let it push it out. And so that's the next level. If you look at any red teamer that is worth their salt today, as soon as they get access, the next thing they're doing is they're trying to look for a token on that machine or a leftover account, admin account that has been left behind and not cleaned up in order to then escalate themselves and then to get access to Active Directory. And then once they're there, it's kind of game over.
Yeah, I love that response. That's spot on. And just to kind of summarize a couple more of these, defense evasion. I listed this one on the slide because as we get into the benchmarks, you'll see how account lockout is mitigating those brute force attacks. They can only try so many times before they're not allowed to try again. So by having these proactive, preventative security settings enforced, you're mitigating the risk and the chance that a bad actor can just do what he wants for as long as he wants. It's about reducing the time he has, making it more difficult, forcing him to be noisier so that the other layers of cybersecurity that you have, because we can get into a talk on layered approach, but cybersecurity has to be in layers so that the bad actor is noisier, that takes more effort, and that your EDR or another solution recognizes it, stops it. So awesome. So let's dive a little bit more into the exact CIS benchmarks. I am going to go ahead and share my screen really quick on this one. Let me find that button. Window. So looking at the CIS benchmarks, we're going to be talking about account, lockout threshold, duration, counters. And I want to note that CIS does an incredible job at explaining these settings. So straight from the CIS documentation, which is a free download, as well as Senteon being a free service to have in the compliance mapping database, you can see the description, the rationale, and the potential impact that CIS describes can happen. So this is very, very valuable insight if you're looking to perform OS hardening or create a baseline for the first time. And I will note a little bit past that, these do cross map to a variety of different settings, whether you're looking to do 800, 171, PCI, SOC 2. I mean, these are, let me find a section. So these are across the board, cross mapped into other sections. So no matter what you're looking to do, whether it's for compliance reasons, security measures, I mean, this is valuable stuff that we're talking about today. So with that, let's hop into the first setting. Account lockout duration. You can highlight that. It's set to 15 or more minutes. Now, that's a long time, Raffi. I can't imagine. I mean, if a user locks themselves out, you know, they just forgot their password and they're locked out for 15 minutes. I mean, I can't imagine that's a fun phone call for you.
I mean, it depends on what time of day it is, right? Mm-hmm. So if somebody's calling us at 2 a.m. because they've locked their account out, that's definitely not a fun call. But you know, there's a reason why it's 15 minutes. It's the 15 minutes is kind of that minimum threshold that it's going to prevent somebody from continuing to access or attempt, but still, but then still is like, all right, if I know that it's 15 minutes, like if the company knows that they're 15 minutes, I can wait 15. It's going to take me longer than 15 minutes in order to get help in the middle of the night or even during the day in some cases. So more than likely, if they're going to reach out if something's urgent, or they're going to wait it out and try it again. So it's kind of that easy middle ground. You know, we actually end up doing 30 minutes most of the time.
Okay. Wow. So how did you come to that decision?
So because we don't want them to wait longer to notify us, but we also don't want to necessarily be woken up in the middle of the night. So so we made it a little bit longer, but to just kind of prevent that, let somebody to do more than just wait out the 15 minutes and try again. So it gives that extra kind of a little bit extra time. Yes, it does lead to more help desk calls. Sure. But honestly, looking back since we've kind of made that determination, we really haven't seen a massive increase in that. And when it came to some of the kind of self-service account reset stuff, it became less and less relevant having that, you know, being able, so we were able to do a longer lockout.
So you said a couple of key things. The first one that I want to highlight is the business already knows that they have it. So if they do that, they're already expecting it. So it sounds like you talk to your businesses about the changes that are coming. They're very aware that they signed up with a security service provider. So that's
we made that mistake more than once, you know, implementing something and not telling anybody. So we're very keen on doing that. Most recently, like unrelated, we shut down USB access for a client. It came up in and that was it was management completely new, everybody knew, but we just didn't send a notice out to the company, and you know, that became, you know, an interesting conversation after the fact. So
yeah, I mean, they're trusting you to do their security, but there's a lot of hoops it sounds like you have to jump through if you want to make a change like this, right? So it's an invasive process. It's intense. The other thing that you had brought up was kind of related to operational efficiency. You know, you were able to increase that to 30 minutes and do those resets and everything. I mean, does having a strong hardened baseline reduce downtime, increase that operational efficiency? Is that part of it?
Yeah, I mean, none of these things work in a vacuum, right? There's no like, all right, this is the one thing that you're doing. It's all in a series of things that you're providing. So, you know, I embrace the idea that although we say that we should have complex passwords, these random generated passwords for everyday logins is probably not the way to go. It's great for like websites and stuff like that, where you have a password manager, but for your everyday login, it's not the way to go. It just causes more problems. It will lead into that stuff.
It's the balance. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so so all of these things work together. So if you have a properly lengthened password with this concept of a decent lockout procedure, then you don't have to deal with you end up the noise itself will reduce itself on its own. So having that additional to entry becomes a non-issue for the employee. So you're balancing, right, the usability of the system versus the security of it. So we're trying to increase the security until this starts tipping the other way. That's where we're stopping. We're not going to do an hour. We're not going to do 2 hours. But 30 minutes was a good middle ground for most clients.
Awesome. So it is okay to do more than what the minimum recommendation is. So yes. That's awesome to hear you've worked up the maturity of your MSP.
Well below the speed limit and still be, you don't have to go all the way up to the speed limit.
Absolutely. So let's look at the next CIS benchmark. Account lockout threshold set to 5 or fewer if you can. But not 0. So one thing I want to emphasize here, CIS Benchmarks does put but not 0 because that is the default Microsoft choice. And if 0, that basically says you can have unlimited attempts.
Yes.
A brute force attack's favorite number.
Yes.
So talk to me about this, because if they do get it set to 5 or fewer, whatever you do have it set, and I'd love for you to kind of share that in one of your stories. But this is relating directly to how many invalid password attempts they can have until that 15 or, in your case, 30-minute lockout. Is that correct?
Yeah, and so we've this was actually one that we used to struggle with a lot.
Okay.
Because you change your password on your desktop, now your iPad's attempting, your laptop's attempting, your mobile's attempting, and I have a long password. I'm by the time I always hold down the shift key longer with one of the letters. So I'm just typing at least 2 or 3 times. So now you're locked out. So this is one area that we struggle with. I think what has improved here is a lot of the more modern authentication, specifically with mobile, that's taken place. It's a less frequent occurrence for someone to multiple attempts to get locked out. And more today, ours is set to 5. So when we see it at if somebody's getting hitting that 5 and we get those alerts and we're looking at them in logs, they're almost always somebody trying to do a brute force. It's rarely ever.
So you caught a brute force kind of in action by that alert. You noticed something going on.
So we actually we caught a bad actor in traffic doing this specifically.
Wow.
We had just taken on a client. Not all our systems were in place. We missed a few things along the way. Lesson learned for us. Egg on my face.
Hey, that's the important part, man. Lessons learned. And if every MSP has that mindset, we're going to be in a much better place.
Yeah, look, and I'm open about this. And it was actually a locked account, that alert that indicated that there was some activity that took place. It was that, and it was also credential dumping that was to take place. So somebody had gotten persistence on a machine, was trying to escalate privileges, was doing a credential dump, and then in the effort of trying to, we got an alert for the credential dump, and we got an alert for the brute force attempts on one of the accounts. And that's how we caught it. And we were able to eliminate the bad actor. So it's one indication, and it allowed those 2 things allowed us to identify that something bad was happening, and we had to take action immediately. And and that was it's one of those 3 a.m.s that had occurred. And I don't know, blind luck, God, shining his light on me, that I happened to be awake and seeing that in real time, that we were able to act quickly.
Yeah, and a couple things on that. This is something I talk about every day when I'm taking Senteon to MSPs, is having this hardened baseline when it configuration changes or meets its max, like this is a indicator of compromise. This allows the engineer, this allows the owner to hop into the battle before the battle's over. You know, why do reactive cleanup if you can stop it before it causes too much damage? So that's an awesome story. And the other thing you said, you know, blind luck, 3 a.m., whatever it was, how important is the timestamp on this alert happening? I mean, you don't typically expect your clients to be working at the middle of the night. So having that timestamp come to you in the middle of the night, I mean, that must raise some alarms.
The conference room PC is likely not being used at 3 a.m. But that was a good indication that something not right is happening.
Yep, absolutely. So let's hop over to the next one. This one's interesting to me. So it is to allow administrator account lockout. So this is big. This can be pretty disruptive, right? I mean, this is saying, hey, if my administrator account has invalid login attempts, I also want you to lock them out. Treat them just like a user. You know, how, I mean, this can raise some workflow issues, can't it, Raffi? I mean, talk to me about this setting.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, you know, hopefully you're not using your daily driver as an admin account. You know, you never want your admin account to be locked out, but there's kind of two mitigating factors to this. One is, you know, so that those accounts will get attempted to be brute force, especially SID 0. You know, SID 0 is going to be attacked every time. And so you need to have some way to get around if your admin accounts are locked out. If you have technicians having their own accounts, having some sort of just-in-time access to administrative credentials. One way we set it up was we set up a break glass account, and we tuck it away. It's never used. It's only used in this kind of situation where it's kind of last resort, where all other systems are unable to be accessed. And so and you obviously want to monitor all your admin accounts, but you really want to keep track of this particular one. And so if this happens, you better be setting off all sorts of, pull the lever on the wall. It's, you know, something bad is happening. You did break glass. And so now you need to figure out what's happening. So if you did use that, everybody's going to know that you did. And so now it's, you know, time to figure out what's going on. But so that's one way to kind of get around that without having to compromise your security by saying, oh, I can't never, ever have a lockout of my admin account. You're going to need multiple admin accounts. You need at least more than one. Don't have too many, because that's not good either.
Don't give it to everyone.
Don't give it. Yeah, exactly. Everybody's admin rights for everybody. So and obviously there's and you know, I think you talk about least privilege in one of your other sessions, but when you have kind of a least privilege mindset, as long as in the break glass account should only have access to that limited set of things.
Absolutely limited. Yeah.
So
absolutely. And thanks for the teaser to next week's episode. I mean, we're going to be talking about user rights assignments. I mean, this is a massive section within CIS benchmarks. There's about 43 benchmarks just talking about user rights assignments. I mean,
I'm glad you gave me the easy one.
I will say, I think 4 is going to be the shortest webinar, but we got to have some incredible industry talk to kick this off. But yes, user rights assignments, that's going to be a long one, and we'll be breaking that up into 2 parts because it is so long. So I'll talk about that a little bit more at the end. Let's dive into the last account lockout policy setting. So reset account lockout is set to 15 or more minutes. Could you just kind of explain to us what this means? You know, talk towards it from a brute force perspective too. You know, they just got locked out. How important is this account lockout timer being set?
Well, I mean, ultimately, if you're doing if you're trying to prevent a brute force attempt, this is more of allowing people to get back to work in a reasonable amount of time. And so this is where you want to make sure that you have set that proper setting. So again, it's a balance between preventing a DOS against that account versus getting people back to work. And more than likely, depending on your employee situation, I'm guessing there are probably other verticals that are like this. I'm most familiar with finance.
Sure.
When they want to do something, they want to do something, and they need access right away. And so we're going to hear. They're probably not going to wait the full 15 minutes, but that at least gives them that leeway in order to do that. So it's a good way of doing that. I remember this was actually, putting back my corporate hat years ago. We had an indefinite lockout. So you locked out, you had to get an admin to reset your password.
Wow.
That became extremely onerous to maintain. Now you have a full-time help desk at that point. It's a little bit different story than with an MSP situation. And the timing ends up being a little bit different. And those are traders that are, smashing their phones on the desk and throwing stuff around. So
deserve to be locked out at that point.
Yes, for sure. But there's also, there's a time, related issue with that. So, I'm guessing in healthcare, you probably have this same kind of urgency in order to get people back to work. And so now that's why you see a lot more people using, NFC card swipes and things like that to log in. So
yeah, there are a lot of
I think again,
trends. A lot of changes coming. I hear passwordless all the time, and
I would love the day that happens. I certainly would. And we're starting to see it a lot more with this, with cloudify.
Cloudify, there it is, trademark during the webinar.
Trademark, cloudify PM. Where you're seeing that, and you had companies like, Double Secret Octopus or Double Octopus Secret, whatever it's called. So there's a lot of that going on too. So I'm excited about those trends. But that being said, how is that? We'd have to see how that'll change how some of this stuff underlying still is going to have the same infrastructure, even if you have a layer of this passwordless stuff going on.
100%. That's the best thing that the CIS benchmarks provide is flexibility. It's not like, hey, you need to do all 450 of these, right? You customize them, you find the right fit for your business, you work with your client, and you find the balance that they can handle. So spot on with all of that. All right. Looks like we got just about 7 more minutes. I want to kick off just some Q&A. I do have some pre-set up questions we can pull up on the screen. But if there's any in the background in the comments, please highlight those. But Raffi, I know we talked all day about this, the risk of creating productivity loss. One of the strategies that you spoke about was actually informing your users of the change coming. I mean, could you talk, is there anything else you want to add to this? How can MSPs today, if they aren't doing this, mitigate the risk of losing productivity at their clients?
Yeah, I think when you're dealing with, again, it also depends on the firm. And this is one of the things with it's a different animal in corporate than it is than MSP land. So in corporate, you have one set of strategy, you're implementing it, everybody's more or less in lockstep, and you kind of you go about your business. Not saying it's easier, just saying that it's different. When you have when you're doing this across multiple clients, and especially if you're an MSP that's in multiple industries, that's going to make it that much more complex. We have 70% of our clients in finance, 30% in other. And so do our others, we try to, let the tail wag the dog a little bit in that case and bring them along for the ride. But sometimes, it doesn't make sense. And so we have to make some adjustments. So it's making sure that you're doing those things along the way. I don't know if that's the right answer to your question.
Absolutely. And I mean, the other half of it, productivity, is also confusion. I mean, when you're implementing these, if they've never experienced an account lockout or know what it is, I mean, confusion comes up as well.
Sometimes it's not obvious that it's an account lockout that's causing a problem. We ran into that difficulty with hosted desktops or virtual desktops as a service, because the services don't necessarily say that your account is locked. They'll say something else, like it just didn't work, and so they don't even realize that they're, and then we may not even realize right away that that's the reason why that's happening. So being not only have to tell your clients, you have to tell your employees too, because sometimes they don't even. So
yeah.
Making sure that's available to them.
Spot on. And I think there's a question in the comments we wanted to highlight. Where do you find the docs you made on aligning to the CIS control? So I think this is a question for Senteon directly. This is in our portal. It's a free sign up for everyone, app.senteon.co. And you can see exactly where each of these CIS benchmarks we're talking about align with the controls and then the various other frameworks out there. The link is also in the top of the comments. So very cool. Last question I want to ask Raffi. Could a malicious actor intentionally lock accounts to disrupt business activity? I mean, if we're hardening these, the intention is to stop them, but what if they just want to stop productivity? I mean, what if they just want to be an annoyance? Wouldn't these GPOs be harmful?
They can be. So they certainly can. I mean, is it likely that they're going to be hitting all accounts at the same time and lock everyone out? That's highly unlikely. The pattern, I guess our pattern, at least in our experience, has borne out a different answer. The answer that we've seen is that it typically is a couple of people, less than 10%, less than 5%, that are the targets of the activity. And they're not necessarily, you would think that, okay, well, it's probably going to be the CEO or the CFO, and it's not necessarily the case. It's usually somebody who is active online as part of the business, whether they're in sales, it could be HR, and those are the people that we see tend to be the first level access that they get. Now, once they do, then they'll try to work and fish their way around the other parts of the company. But that's what we've seen. So could in your question is a good theoretical kind of use case. What would happen if something like that would happen? Hopefully you have all sorts of alarms and bells and whistles going off if that's the case. And so you can react appropriately to that.
They're disrupting themselves. They're getting themselves caught, right? Sure, they might be causing some disruption, but they're letting you know they're there as well.
Yeah.
Well, this was an awesome conversation. Thank you for being a guest, Raffi. That's
my pleasure. Not as funny as Roddy, I know. He's more.
You didn't have any metaphors having to do with drowning or.
I'm not from the backwoods of Louisiana like Roddy is. So, I grew up here in the city. It's, different animal.
I love it. And the big thing from both of you guys though was stories and metaphors. I mean, you used it during this conversation. Roddy used it last week. I mean, every week I think a challenge to every guest: bring metaphors, bring stories. That's how your end clients are going to understand. So very much appreciate it. All right, so diving in to a look at next week. So as we're watching today, we are on LinkedIn Live. We will post this to our YouTube channel afterwards as well. But we are standardizing our schedule to be every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Upcoming presentations, we are having Ken Murr from LCM Security hopping on the show to talk about user rights assignments. Like I said, it's a two-parter. We're going over 40-some configurations. Not going to be a lot of small talk at the start of those. After that, we do have Eric Woodard from ProTech Support coming in. And for a overview of the last week's episode and exclusive slide content to go over each configuration, subscribe to our newsletter, CIS Unlock, the Benchmark series. That is straight on my LinkedIn profile for you to go on. Awesome. So looking at the wrap up and next steps, my LinkedIn is right there on the screen. We will have Rich with us in the future. And just like last week, I probably should include the special guest speaker's LinkedIn on the profile. Raffi, if you want to toss your LinkedIn into the chat, that would be awesome. If you also want to be a guest on the show, reach out to me directly. Would love to have you. And if you are an MSP looking to implement the CIS benchmarks, we do have a free solution for you guys to utilize for the cross-compliance mapping and gap assessments implementation. Of course, comes with the full solution. Be on the lookout for the Discord community. And that's all I got for us today. Thank you, everyone.